The wedding caught fire, guests fled in chaos. My groom ran away, holding another woman's hand. I was left behind, trapped under the wreckage, struggling for 3 days and nights. By the time I was rescued, I was already paralyzed from the chest down. The rest of my life would be spent confined to a bed. And as for my husband, because I told him I didn't love him, he brought a different woman home every night, forcing me to watch as they indulged in pleasure right in front of me. When I accidentally fell from the balcony, I thought everything had finally ended. But when I opened my eyes, I realized I had returned to my wedding day. Everyone was there, smiling and offering their blessings as I prepared to marry Lucas Bennett. But I knew the truth. 3 minutes from now, he would take another woman's hand and flee for his life. Beside me, Lucas stood tall and elegant, exuding an air of nobility. He gently slid the wedding ring onto my finger and placed a soft kiss on my forehead, as if he truly loved me. But I remembered everything. In my past life, just to punish me for attending a class reunion without his permission, he had personally orchestrated this fire, all so he could watch me suffer in humiliation. Unfortunately for him, things spiraled beyond his control. When the doctor told him I had suffered severe burns, was permanently disfigured and paralyzed from the chest down, he finally panicked. Even in my unconscious state, I could hear him furiously berating his assistant, blaming everyone but himself. After all, the proud heir of the Bennett family could never be at fault. The efficient soft voice pulled me back to the present. This wedding was a highly anticipated union between the Bennett Corporation and the Lawson family, attracting widespread attention. Numerous media outlets had cameras set up to broadcast it live. To further humiliate me, Lucas had even invited my longtime rival, Vanessa Reed. I remembered the headlines from that day, "True Love Revealed in the Face of Death." The featured image showed Lucas holding Vanessa's hand as they ran through the flames together, while I lay buried beneath the debris, barely clinging to life, desperately waiting for rescue. Suppressing my disgust, I took his hand. "Let me take you somewhere, okay?" His dark eyes, deep as ink, studied me closely. Even when he was suspicious, he still looked effortlessly handsome. As he gazed at me in silence, it was as if I were his entire world. But I knew better. His world was cold and shadowed, with not even a sliver of light penetrating its depths. At this moment, his expression was full of tenderness. He asked softly, "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere only the two of us know," I replied. I leaned into him, gently tracing my fingers over his palm. My sudden submission clearly pleased him. His expression softened slightly as he reached out, brushing his fingers through the ends of my hair. Leaning down, he whispered against my ear, "Nina, that's more like it." His voice was warm and gentle, but it sent chills down my spine. He had always wanted me to be obedient, to listen, to remain locked away in his luxurious mansion, like a caged bird. Every time I tried to escape, he would fly into a rage and drag me back, pressing his fingers against his temples in frustration, his gaze filled with obsession. "Nina, you're misbehaving." "Nina, do you know what happens to runaway girls? Nina, don't you love me anymore?" And my final answer had always been the same: I don't. His eyes turned bloodshot as he shattered everything in sight. But what Lucas never understood was, how could I dare to love him? His love was a poison, lethal and inescapable. I led Lucas backstage, using the excuse of searching for something, then quietly slipped away. In my past life, I had fled here in desperation. There was supposed to be an exit, but because the fire had burned for too long, the collapsed beams had already blocked the path. "This time, Lucas, it's your turn to die." The fire spread rapidly. I blended into the crowd, moving toward the exit alongside the other guests. Outside, reporters had already aimed their cameras at me. Tears streamed down my face as I cried out in despair, pretending to rush back into the flames, only for a white silhouette to sprint past me. It was Vanessa. As the crowd watched her rush into the inferno, all eyes turned to me. I felt momentarily exposed, but quickly chose to feign unconsciousness. I had no intention of saving anyone. After all, in my past life, no one had saved me. But what I didn't expect was that Vanessa actually managed to save Lucas. Despite being only 5'5", her face was covered in soot as she emerged from the fire, supporting his weight. Supporting the nearly 6'3" man, she trembled as she emerged from the fire. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters captured the moment. As expected, the next day's headlines were identical to my past life. True love revealed in the face of death. Once again, I became the heartless woman who abandoned her husband, condemned by public opinion. Lucas, why didn't you just die? The disaster at the wedding was a huge embarrassment for my uncle. To save face, he ordered me to take care of Lucas at the hospital. Since my parents had passed away long ago, my uncle's family had only ever given me the bare minimum to survive. That was precisely why Lucas had been able to imprison me for years without interference. I held no respect for these so-called family members. Just imagining Lucas waking up and going into a frenzy when he realized I wasn't by his side sent a chill down my spine. That deep-rooted fear, carved into me by years of his control, still ran through my bones. At the hospital, someone was already sitting by Lucas's bedside. Vanessa Reed, wrapped in bandages, stared blankly at his unconscious figure. He wasn't disfigured. He hadn't lost any limbs. He simply lay there, breathing steadily, as if he were only in a deep sleep. "How is he?" My sudden voice startled Vanessa. She turned to me, momentarily flustered. "The poison. The doctor says he might not wake up," she murmured, her voice growing smaller and smaller, tears welling up in her eyes. "Lucas is still so young." She lowered her head, ready to cry again. I cut her off immediately. "That's great news." A smile spread across my face without a hint of concealment. If he was never going to wake up, didn't that mean I could divorce him right away and be free forever? 5 years. For 5 years, he had kept me locked away. I wasn't allowed outside. I wasn't allowed to meet anyone. I had long since forgotten what it meant to live like a normal person. Without him, I could finally breathe. I could finally live. What did you just say?" Vanessa lifted her head, her voice tinged with disbelief. It was no secret that she was infatuated with Lucas. I gripped her hand firmly and entrusted her with sincerity. "Lucas's future is in your hands now. A perfect match, one willing to give, the other willing to take." This wasn't my sin to bear. Vanessa's eyes turned red, but they held nothing but excitement. "Thank you, Nina," she whispered. I wasted no time contacting our families. The Bennetts had never truly accepted me. Without Lucas supporting me, they couldn't wait to cast me aside. The Reeds, on the other hand, were a powerful and influential family, the ideal in-laws they had been hoping for. My uncle's opinion barely mattered. His only concern was securing his share of the financial settlement. The 3 families went back and forth negotiating the terms of the arrangement, all while the proud and ruthless Lucas Bennett lay unconscious in his hospital bed, completely unaware that his fate was being decided without him. Before leaving, I took one last look at him. Objectively speaking, he was handsome, especially now, lying there motionless, almost like a corpse. After breaking free from him, I made the same wish to the gods every year. Please, let him never wake up. Before Lucas imprisoned me, I was a struggling actress, a C-list celebrity at best. Once I made it clear to my uncle that I had no interest in fighting for power, he reluctantly threw me a few supporting roles. I earned my own money and spent it freely, nothing extravagant, but I never lacked the basics. After Lucas fell into a coma, I capitalized on the scandal. I rode the wave of his name and turned myself into a controversial, infamous figure. Then, I signed with a management agency and embraced my typecasting as the villainess. My roles as scheming, malicious women made me a household name. I worked only a few months out of the year. The rest of the time, I packed my bags and traveled the world. I watched the northern lights in the Arctic, wandered the vast dunes of the Sahara, and lived each day exactly as I pleased. Life was good, and yet on certain nights when I drifted into uneasy sleep, I would dream of Lucas chasing after me. His voice echoed in my mind, desperate yet commanding. "Nina, you can't escape. You're mine." I would jolt awake, gasping for air, scanning the empty room, reassuring myself that he wasn't there. Only then would I finally breathe easy. Until one day, during my annual visit to the temple, I walked into the prayer hall, only to see a man already kneeling on the cushion before the altar. His frame was tall yet gaunt, his sharp features hollowed by time. The oversized suit draped over his body made him look almost fragile. And the moment I saw him, a deafening roar echoed in my mind as countless thoughts of escape flashed through my head. But my feet, weighed down by fear, felt as if they were sinking into thick mud. Lucas heard the movement and turned around. His face had become so gaunt that I almost didn't recognize him. A layer of white gauze covered his eyes. "Lucas, stop kneeling. Your body hasn't fully recovered yet." Vanessa's voice rang out as she pushed a wheelchair toward him, her face glowing with happiness. He didn't see me. I stood outside, gripping the red pillar for support, my body trembling as I slowly sank to my knees. Lucas was awake, but he was blind, and yet he hadn't come looking for me. I pulled every string, exhausted every connection I had to investigate. In the end, I found out that Lucas had woken up 3 months ago. However, after being bedridden for 3 years, his condition was poor. The smoke from the fire had damaged his eyes, and according to the doctors, the chances of him ever regaining his sight were slim. Relief washed over me. The heavens had been merciful. He was only blind, and yet the fear carved into my bones never faded. Every moment, I felt like he would come for me, drag me back into his world. I started making plans to flee abroad. He was blind. There was no way his reach could extend that far. My agent was horrified, looking at me like I had lost my mind. He blocked my way, reminding me of the breach of contract fees for my next film. "Even if we sold you and me both, we wouldn't be able to pay it off," he muttered. "What movie?" I snatched the contract from his hand and counted the zeros. Career was valuable, but life was even more so. Yet with a penalty fee this absurdly high, I really couldn't afford to run. If I disappeared, I'd be sued, and things would only escalate further. None of it would end in my favor. The opening ceremony for Tempting Flowers was as grand as expected, a massive production. Half of the industry's most influential figures were present. For someone with a ruined reputation like me to land a role in such a film, this wasn't some miraculous stroke of luck. Someone had pulled the strings. I kept my head down, staying as invisible as possible, mingling in the crowd, eating and drinking quietly. But my agent caught me and dragged me toward the director. "Director Lee, this is my artist. Please take care of her," he said, forcing my head into a bow. The renowned director barely spared me a glance, rolling his eyes so hard they almost disappeared into his skull. My agent, however, pretended not to notice, his face plastered with an ingratiating smile. People in this industry didn't like me. I knew that. I wasn't one of them. I had no formal acting background. I had used connections to land roles, and I had relied on controversy to stay relevant. Every single one of those offenses was a slap in the face to these self-proclaimed artists. Watching my agent grovel made my skin crawl. I crossed my arms, lifting my chin arrogantly. "If you don't want me in the film, then don't cast me. It's not like I care." Director Lee froze for a second before sneering at me with even greater contempt. "If it weren't for him pulling the strings, I wouldn't have given you a second look." He scoffed before walking away. My agent turned to me, whispering urgently, "Who is he?" Who else could it be? Lucas never changed. Even after 2 lifetimes, I understood him better than anyone. He would never let me go. His silence after waking up was nothing more than the eerie calm before a storm. I clenched my fists, reminding myself, if he makes a move, I'll counter it. I wasn't the same person I used to be. Lucas Bennett no longer scared me. From the first day on set to the official start of filming, I had an unsettling feeling, like someone was watching me. My agent brushed it off, laughing. "Lucas is blind. Stop scaring yourself. Maybe you just have a stalker fan." A fan? That was laughable. If anything, I had anti-fans, people who loathed me to their very core. No one knew the real Lucas, the twisted, obsessive man he was behind closed doors. To the world, he was the perfect husband candidate, ranking at the top of every most desirable bachelor list. To the public, my marriage to him had been a miracle, a frog who had somehow managed to swallow a swan. And when I abandoned him at the wedding and divorced him after his coma, I became the most heartless woman of the century. For every person who adored Lucas, there was someone who despised me. But so what? I'd rather be hated than be trapped in a nightmare again. Yet soon after filming began, strange things started happening. My belongings started disappearing. At first it was small things, a lollipop I had half eaten, a hairpin I had left on my vanity. Then it escalated. Entire outfits from my scenes went missing. A disturbing feeling settled over me. This wasn't random theft. Someone was watching me. This was exactly Lucas's style. At the corner of the film set, I intercepted the man tailing me and ordered him to arrange a meeting with Lucas. After all these years, it was time for us to end things once and for all. But I wasn't foolish enough to step foot into the Bennett estate again. I chose a public place, right in the middle of the bustling film set. Lucas arrived, pushed forward by his bodyguards in a wheelchair. His complexion was deathly pale, his sunken cheekbones more pronounced than ever. The white gauze still covered his eyes. He was nothing like the powerful man he once was. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to speak, but it took a long moment before he finally broke the silence. "Nina, it's been so long." His voice was hoarse, raw with emotion. "You agreeing to see me? That makes me so happy." His fingers, once elegant and strong, now gripped the armrest of his wheelchair with alarming force. His thin arms tensed, veins protruding under his skin, as though he were struggling to endure something unbearable. His fingertips pressed against his palms so hard that blood began to bead at the edges of his nails. It was a nervous habit, one I had only seen in my past life after I had become paralyzed. I was impatient. "Say what you need to say, and make it quick." "Are you doing well?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. I merely looked him over, taking in his frail state. "Without you, I've been doing better than ever." All the pain in my life had come from him, and yet he had the audacity to ask me this ridiculous question. "Why are you having people follow me?" I demanded. His hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Because I don't dare come to you myself," I scoffed. "Not daring to come find me? That's new." My silence unsettled him. His head tilted slightly, his expression uncertain. "Nina, I miss you." His voice trembled. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can you forgive me?" 2 lifetimes. In 2 lifetimes I had never heard an apology from him. Was this a new tactic? Lure me back in with a pitiful display, only to lock me up like a dog at his side again? "Nina, please don't ignore me." His breathing grew erratic, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He bit his lips so hard that blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. He couldn't see me. His entire body trembled, just like the first time we had met, helpless and lost. But I wasn't that naive girl anymore. His voice was almost pleading. "Nina, say something, anything. I'll change. Whatever you don't like, I'll change. I won't force you anymore. We can just be friends, okay? Be friends with the man who once imprisoned me." I watched his performance coldly and leaned in, whispering by his ear, "Lucas, you've been reborn too, haven't you?" His face instantly froze. It was the expression of a man whose darkest secret had just been exposed. His warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, detached stillness, like the depths of an ice-covered abyss. I smiled. "Lucas, is this really necessary?" Slowly, I crouched before him, lowering myself to his level. "Do we still need to keep up this act? This pitiful, remorseful facade? Only the naive girl I once was would have fallen for it." He had always known how to manipulate emotions, how to feign innocence, how to exploit my sympathy. That was how he had lured me back to the Bennett estate in my past life, trapping me there for years, stripping me of my freedom. I suddenly recalled the secret room he had once shown me. The walls covered in photos of me, from high school to my early acting career, every single one of them taken in secret. Scattered throughout the room were items he had stolen from me over the years. A chewed piece of gum, worn clothes, intimate garments. That day the sight had sent waves of nausea rolling through me, disgust crawling under my skin. That day, he had knelt before me, looking so pitiful, begging me not to leave, telling me he loved me. And I had foolishly believed that I could teach him what love meant. I had been wrong. His love was nothing but selfish obsession. "So," I murmured, tilting my head, "what's your plan this time? Will you drive me into debt, ruin me financially, force me to beg at your feet? Or will you take the more direct approach? Knock me out, lock me up, keep me in a dark room until I finally surrender to you?" "Lucas," I whispered, staring into his blank gaze, "are you disappointed that I didn't die in that fire? If I had, you could have kept my ashes. But now I'm nothing you can hold on to." The set was busy with people passing by. I leaned against the wall, looking down at the once powerful man in front of me. Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. "Nina, I never wanted you to die." He shook his head frantically, reaching out before quickly withdrawing his hand, suppressing the impulse. "Nina." Did he still think I was the same Nina from my past life? Did he believe that just because we had started over, I would follow him like before? A cold laugh escaped my lips as I watched the color drain completely from his face. He sat in his wheelchair, lifeless as a sheet of paper, radiating nothing but quiet despair. "Lucas, you don't need anyone to save you," I said flatly. "You need medication." His trembling hand clenched into a fist. After a long silence, his thin lips parted, and he murmured, "I won't bother you again." His sudden surrender didn't surprise me. It sent a chill down my spine instead. "What kind of trick are you playing now?" I leaned in, watching the slight tremble of his lashes beneath the gauze covering his eyes. "I came to see you, one last time," he murmured. His fingers dug into his palm beneath his oversized suit, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You were the one who called me here." I frowned. I hadn't called him. Then a thought crossed my mind. What had he been praying for at the temple that day? I looked at his frail body and asked with amusement, "Lucas, are you dying or something?" Lately, I had been haunted by dreams, long, torturous nightmares. In them, I had died. And after my death, Lucas refused to let anyone touch me. He held my cold, lifeless body, kissing my frozen lips, embracing me for an entire day and night. Then one evening, with an eerily calm expression, he carried me into the deep, endless sea. The waves were violent, but his determination was unwavering, as if he were a devoted disciple walking toward salvation. A phone call startled me awake. On the other end, Vanessa was sobbing uncontrollably, her voice shaking so hard that I could barely understand her. Annoyed, I asked, "What are you saying?" "Lucas attempted suicide," she wailed. "And what did that have to do with me?" I hung up, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Frustrated, I turned on the TV. Every news channel was replaying the same story, Lucas Bennett's attempted suicide. I forced myself to sit through the reports, but none of them answered the only question that mattered to me. Did he actually die? Lucas had risen to power young. From an illegitimate son hidden in the shadows to the ruthless leader of the Knight Corporation, it had only taken him 21 years. When had he set his sights on me? I didn't know. I had never asked. Maybe it was the half-eaten piece of bread I had given him once. Maybe it was a fleeting moment of kindness. A time when I had unknowingly played the heroine in his twisted story. Men like Lucas, mentally unhinged, obsessively possessive, only needed the smallest spark of affection to spiral into madness. They would strip away every ounce of independence from the person they fixated on, consuming them whole. As I approached the hospital, Vanessa spotted me immediately. "Please, save Lucas," she cried, grabbing my wrist. "The doctor said he has no will to live. The only time he reacts is when he hears your name." "Oh, really?" I said indifferently, glancing through the window into his hospital room. His wrists were wrapped in thick bandages, the faintest traces of blood still seeping through. He lay motionless in bed, his expression peaceful. Too peaceful. His chest barely rose and fell, his breathing shallow. If he wanted to die, he should just do it. I lowered my gaze. He hadn't even begun to repay the suffering he had put me through. The heart monitor let out a sharp, blaring beep. Vanessa's panic escalated instantly. She clutched my clothes, her voice breaking. "You saw him before he did this, didn't you? What did you say to him?" Her grip was desperate, frantic. "You killed him. It's your fault." A team of doctors and nurses rushed into the room, drawing the curtain as they worked to save him. "Please," Vanessa sobbed, collapsing at my feet. "Please save him." I crouched down and pried her fingers off me one by one, my expression blank. "I'm not a doctor," I said coldly. "I can't save anyone." She suddenly stopped crying. Her red-rimmed eyes met mine. "I know Lucas has hurt you," she whispered, voice trembling. "But he truly regrets it now. The first thing he asked when he woke up was, 'Where is Nina?' He kept saying, he's just glad it wasn't you trapped in the fire. That he's just grateful you're alive," Vanessa sobbed. "He would rather lock himself away, smashing his head against the wall, cutting his hands to shreds, than dare come looking for you." She clenched her fists, her voice trembling. "He takes handfuls of sleeping pills every night, says that if he's asleep, he won't hurt you anymore. And as soon as he could get out of bed, he went to the temple to pray, for you, for your happiness, for your long life." Then, suddenly, she raised her voice, making sure everyone in the corridor could hear. "Nina, you're the only one who can save Lucas. Are you really going to let him die?" I looked around. A swarm of reporters had already flooded the hallway, their cameras aimed at the hospital room. My brows furrowed. "What are you doing?" Vanessa's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Then, in a voice only I could hear, she whispered, "Are you really going to abandon him in front of the media?" She had made the right bet. Or rather, Lucas had made the right bet. I couldn't. On the hospital bed, Lucas's lips were chapped and pale. His gaze was empty, and beneath his hospital gown, his body was covered in scars, some old and scabbed over, others fresh and jagged, layered in a grotesque mess. The ruthless, once unshakable leader of the Knight Corporation was now using the most juvenile, pathetic method possible to escape his problems. In my past life, Vanessa had told me about Lucas's miserable childhood. She had said he had suffered too much, that I was the only warmth in his world. Everyone had told me that being chosen by Lucas was my greatest fortune. No one had cared about what I wanted. No one had cared about my life. And now the roles had reversed. Lucas was the one drowning, and suddenly everyone was desperate to pull him back up. I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas, you haven't even finished repaying me yet. How dare you try to die?" His eyelashes trembled. The next second, a team of doctors rushed in to perform emergency treatment, pushing me out of the room. I walked out into the streets, feeling neither sorrow nor joy. I hadn't expected relief, but I hadn't expected happiness either. I had no time to dwell on emotions. My phone rang. It was my agent, his voice sharp like a debt collector. "Nina, you're done for." His tone was flat, eerily calm. I unlocked my phone. The top trending searches were all about Lucas, hopelessly in love, Lucas Bennett's obsession. Nina Lynn drove Lucas Bennett to his death, Lucas survives emergency resuscitation. And then, the only one that caught my interest, Nina Lynn removed from production. I clicked on it. The entire cast had voted me out. "If I drop out, do I still have to pay the breach of contract fee?" I asked. My agent's voice was low, almost frightening. "What do you think?" "Then let's pay," I said, hanging up. I had just saved Lucas's life. The Bennett family could afford to bleed a little for this. I returned to the set, fully prepared for the director to explode in rage. But the studio was eerily quiet. A crew member whispered to me, "The director's waiting inside." The actor who was supposed to be my co-star patted my shoulder, looking equally nervous. I gave him a reassuring glance before pushing the door open. A heavy script flew straight at me, hitting my forehead with a loud smack. A red mark instantly formed. "You actually dared to dodge?" The director slammed his hands on the table, not at me, but at the PR team across from him. They stood with their heads lowered, looking thoroughly miserable. The director shot me a sharp glance. "What are you standing there for? The entire crew has been waiting for you all day. We're rolling." Ah, right, I had forgotten. Directors like him didn't just despise people like me, actors with no formal training who had gotten in through connections. But if there was one thing they hated even more, it was being manipulated by public opinion. A production assistant hesitated before pointing toward the entrance. "Nina, someone sent you flowers again." I looked over. A truck full of roses was blocking the studio gate, causing a traffic jam. "What do we do with them?" I flipped through my script and said without looking up, "Throw them out." For the past half-month, Lucas had sent a different bouquet of roses every single day, and he wasn't stopping anytime soon. The Knight Corporation officially announced the termination of their engagement with the Reed family. At the same time, Lucas's public declaration that he wanted to pursue me again shot to the top of trending searches. Netizens speculated that I must have saved his life in a past life. How laughable. If anything, in our past life, he owed me a life. "Nina, can we start over?" I had just finished filming and was about to return to my dressing room when Lucas's voice sounded behind me. "We finally got a second chance. Don't push me away, okay?" His voice was low, desperate. "Anything you don't like, I'll change. I'll never hurt you again." My fingers froze on the door handle. A fire ignited in my chest. Start over? Did he really think that just because we had another chance, he could erase the past? That he could suddenly become normal? I turned around, looking down at him. He was clutching the bandages on his wrist, visibly tense. "If I said something that made you misunderstand that day, don't overthink it," I said coldly. "I was lying, because honestly, I wish you were dead." He flinched, his grip on his wrist tightening. A long silence stretched between us before he finally whispered, "Then I can't die until I've paid back everything I owe you." "Then go ahead and pay it back." He said he could change for me, do anything for me. I didn't believe him, so I made a bet. He couldn't change. The monster inside him had long become a part of him. Someone like him could never learn to love like a normal person. He smiled and agreed. "If I lose, I'll let you go completely." After that, he was at the set almost every day, sitting quietly in his wheelchair. Unlike before, this time he was the one following me. He never interfered, never made a scene, just silently staying by my side. The other crew members were terrified of him, avoiding my section of the set like the plague. Before I knew it, I had my own little isolation zone. "Don't you have anything better to do?" I finally asked. In my past life, he had locked me in a house where I saw no one but the maid who brought me food. He had often left for days, too busy with work to check on me. Now, he just sat there, smiling lazily. "I do have something to do, thinking about you." I scoffed, but he continued, voice gentle, "The doctors say there's a chance I might regain my sight." He handed me a cup of water, his voice almost affectionate. "I really want to see you, Nina. It's been too long. I'm afraid I'll forget what you look like." He continued talking to himself. "Once filming is over, let's go to the beach. I remember you love the ocean." I let out a quiet sigh. I didn't love the ocean. I only loved it because, in my past life, it was the closest thing to freedom I had ever known. "Don't come tomorrow," I said flatly. His expression immediately shifted. "Why?" His hands pressed against the arms of his wheelchair as if ready to stand. "What did I do wrong?" "Nina, you promised to give me a chance." I arched an eyebrow, staring at the reflection of myself in his dark sunglasses. "Fine," I said. "I'll give you a chance." The next day, he arrived at the set right on time. I smiled, flipping my script shut. Today's scene is a kissing scene. Lucas's entire body tensed, his lips pressing into a tight line. "What's the problem?" I teased. "You're blind. Just pretend you didn't see anything." I reached out and pulled off his sunglasses. The moment my fingertips brushed against his skin, his entire body stiffened. "Nina," he inhaled sharply, his voice trembling. "Don't do this." His voice dropped into a near whisper, almost pleading. "I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself." In our past life, he had never been able to accept me touching anyone else. Even a casual conversation could send him spiraling into a fit of paranoia. "You said you'd change, didn't you?" I challenged. "This is your chance to realize that you never will." My co-star, Ethan Carter, had been cast as the male lead. This was our second time working together. Years ago, when he was on the rise, we had been caught up in dating rumors. Lucas had shut down his career overnight. It wasn't until the 3 years that Lucas was in a coma that Ethan was able to make a comeback. And now, the first major project of his return was starring alongside me again. "So how does it feel?" I asked, half joking. I expected him to brush it off, maybe even call it bad luck. Instead, he grinned. "I'd say we have fate on our side." When I returned from the makeup room, Ethan was sitting in my chair, casually chatting with Lucas. "You're really blind, huh?" Lucas casually waved a hand in front of his own face. "Disappointed?" he said coldly. "I can still see a little light." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You come to set every day. What's your relationship with Nina now?" He smirked. "Ex-husband turned loyal lapdog?" Lucas's expression darkened, his gaze locking onto Ethan with an unsettling intensity. "Ethan Carter," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if savoring the name. He curled his lips into a mockery of a smile. "How's your father's business doing?" Ethan's smirk faltered. Lucas continued, his voice quiet but menacing. "The fact that you're even standing here is my oversight. If you want to keep working in this industry, stay away from Nina. You know I don't have much patience." Ethan's expression hardened. His playful demeanor vanished in an instant as he took a step closer, eyes defiant. "Yeah, you really screwed me over back then," Ethan said. "But who would have thought you're the one who ended up crippled first?" I stood at the corner, frozen. My mind went blank. Memories came rushing back. Ethan and I had debuted together. We were both newcomers, full of ambition. One night, after wrapping a late shoot, he picked a wildflower from the side of the road and confessed to me. I told him I'd give him an answer the next day. But the next day, he never showed up to set. I later heard that someone had beaten him so badly he was left with a shattered leg, barely clinging to life. Shortly after, Lucas entered my world. He showered me with kindness, giving me endless resources, securing me roles, making sure I was always comfortable and cared for. He knew every little thing about me, my preferences, my habits, my struggles. He was perfect, almost too perfect. I saw the vulnerability beneath his cold exterior, and I thought naively that I could give him the security he needed, that I could teach him what love was. I was wrong. Terribly, disastrously wrong, and the price of that mistake had been my life. People used to say I was lucky, that I, a struggling actress, had somehow caught the eye of someone as powerful as Lucas Bennett. They said he loved me madly. He did love me. Loved me enough to lock me away, to strip me of everything, to make me his and his alone. He lured me into the Bennett estate and kept me there for 5 years. 5 years of breaking me down, piece by piece. He cut me off from the world, severed my ties with friends and family, erased my existence from society. I became nothing more than something he owned. At first, I tried to escape, but everyone who helped me, every single person, met a horrifying fate. Bankruptcy. Disappearance, permanent disability. One by one, they all suffered until I no longer dared to run. On countless nights, Lucas would hold me in his trembling arms, pressing desperate, fevered kisses against my forehead. "Nina," he would whisper, his voice hoarse with madness. "How could you betray me? How could you try to run? I love you so much, so much. You can't think about anyone else. You can only have me. Because I only have you." He would swallow pills in front of me, heavy doses of medication meant to dull his mind, to suppress the chaos inside him. He said if he numbed himself, he wouldn't hurt me. But the next day, he would always wake up the same. I would lock myself in the bathroom, fingers stuffed down my throat, trying to purge the sickness from my body. Or I would dig my nails into my wrist, scratching, scraping, just to remind myself that this wasn't love. Love wasn't supposed to be like this. Even now, beneath my watch, the scars still remained. Faded, but never gone. Never gone. The kissing scene was delayed until the next day. I knew Lucas had something to do with it. The next morning, Ethan disappeared. His luggage was still neatly packed in his hotel room, but he was nowhere to be found. And Lucas, who never once missed just a single day of watching over me, was absent. I immediately went to the Bennett estate. The gate code was still my birthday. The house was freezing, colder than I remembered. It felt less like a home and more like a haunted graveyard. A chill ran down my spine. On the second floor, down the hall, was the third room on the right. The room where I had been imprisoned for 5 years. Unlike the other rooms, this one had remained untouched, abandoned, left exactly as it was. The doorknob was smooth, polished from frequent use. Someone had been coming in and out of this room regularly. My fingers trembled as I turned the handle. The curtains were drawn tightly shut. No lights were on. The room felt suffocating, like a black hole pulling me back into the past. The walls, every inch of them, were covered in photographs of me, from high school to now. The only gap was the 3 years he had been in a coma. For nearly a decade, I had lived under this man's surveillance. A wave of nausea and terror surged up my throat, nearly consuming me whole. "Nina, is that you?" Lucas was curled up on the bed. The sound of the door unlocking had startled him. A flicker of surprise, no joy, flashed across his face. Scattered across the table were pills. Inside the closet, my old clothes still hung neatly, untouched. Everything in the room remained exactly as it had been 3 years ago. I swallowed back the bile rising in my throat and forced myself not to look at the grotesque collection of personal items he had hoarded. I cut straight to the point. "Where is Ethan? Where are you keeping him?" The mention of Ethan's name made Lucas's expression freeze. His eyes reddened, disbelief flashing across his face. "You came here for him?" His voice wavered, barely holding back something dark and furious. "I thought you came for me," I repeated. "What did you do to him?" "Who else could it be?" His lips curled in a bitter smile. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat up, his back facing me, his tone suddenly cold. "Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's still alive. If I'd known you cared about him this much, I would have dealt with him sooner." He braced himself against the edge of the bed, standing unsteadily. His bloodshot eyes met mine. "Nina, is this what you want me to say?" He stood in the darkness, the light from the doorway casting shadows across his face, making him look almost fragile. "Stop pretending," I said icily. "I won't believe you again. Lucas, no matter how much you try to change, you'll always end up the same, locking me up, keeping me for yourself. You're sick, disgusting, selfish. This," I gestured around the room, "this is the real you. How could you ever change?" I shouted the last words at him. Something inside him snapped. His knuckles turned white against the crutch he was leaning on. His expression twisted. His breath came faster, and step by step, he advanced toward me, forcing me back into the corner. I told myself there was no reason to be afraid of him. He was blind. He was crippled. But my legs refused to move. Because in that moment, he looked exactly like the Lucas from my past life. The lunatic who would destroy everything just because I disobeyed him. A fear I had buried for so long crashed down on me, suffocating. I clenched my eyes shut. He stopped just inches from me. I felt his breath, heavy and erratic. Then he reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, and froze. He had felt it, the way I was shaking. I opened my eyes and saw his lips pressed into a tight, pale line. Beneath his sleeve, fresh wounds trailed up his wrist, the red marks snaking toward his palm. His voice was hoarse. "Nina? Do I really disgust you that much? Is there really no hope for us?" Tears slipped down his face, falling onto mine. I didn't know if they were his or mine. They ran down my jaw, soaking into my collar. I turned and ran. I didn't know how far I ran. I just ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. Lucas had admitted it. He had lost the bet. He had promised to let me go. He had said he would find a way to put my mind at ease. That he would never entangle himself with me again. I walked along the riverside, slowly making my way back to the set. Ethan was lounging in my chair, his usual carefree smile in place. "Nina, where have you been?" he teased. "Don't tell me you ran off to avoid our kiss scene?" He held up a bouquet. "It's Valentine's Day, so I picked these out just for you." I barely registered his words, my mind still in a daze. Ethan, however, seemed unbothered. He laughed as he pulled apart the bouquet, handing out roses to the female crew members. "Don't rush, ladies. One for everyone." The rest of the shoot passed quickly. Ethan finished his scenes earlier than I did. At the farewell party, he grinned and asked, "Want to exchange numbers? I don't think anyone's going to break my legs this time, right?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, making a joke that wasn't particularly funny. I smiled, distant and polite. "No need. I wish you a bright future in your career." He paused for a moment, then chuckled, flashing a carefree grin. "Nina Lynn, I wish you the same." And just like that, Lucas vanished completely from my life. Later, when the movie premiered, it was a huge success. At the prestigious film festival held once every 4 years, Ethan and I were nominated for Best On-Screen Couple of the Year. The venue was filled with stars, but we were the only award-winning duo absent that night. During the live-streamed video call, the host asked if we would collaborate again in the future. The sound of my name being called softly brought me back to reality. Meanwhile, online viewers flooded the chat with excited comments, saying they had just witnessed a real-life on-screen couple moment. But by then, I had already been living in a small town in the south of France for 6 months. My agent, sitting beside me, was watching the broadcast while scolding me for being unambitious, complaining that I had ruined his reputation in front of his peers. "When are you coming back?" he sighed. "I swear, I ask you this question at least 100 times a day. There are already 3 projects waiting for you. If you don't return soon, you'll be outdated." I blinked lazily. "Then I'll go back." As I picked up my phone, the screen lit up with the latest news. Lucas Bennett has died after falling from a building. The location of his fall was the exact same place where I had fallen to my death in my past life. I turned off the news app, preparing for my flight back. That's when I noticed an unread message on my phone. Just a string of numbers, but I knew exactly who they belonged to. The message was short, only 7 words. "I'm giving you back your freedom." I stared at those words for a long time before finally putting my phone away. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The world before me was vast and open, and once again I was about to embark on a new journey.